Hello and welcome. I haven't done a Mercury retrograde video in a while since I think I was only doing my recordings on Instagram. So I thought I'd best come on and talk into this Mercury retrograde. We've entered the shadow. And as you know, at this point, I really want to show you how to do some of these things yourself. Of course, astrology is like a really, really big and complicated language, and it's overwhelming to expect yourself to be ready to discern and decipher too deeply. So there's so many supportive forecasts out there. But as you learn a little bit more, you can infuse that more personally into your own chart, which is where you really start to see the impacts and the magic. So I'm just going to show you here on AstroSeek. If you go to Astro Tools and you go to Retrograde Planets, that's where I am. And we are talking about Mercury. This is going to show you all the others as well, but we're just going to look at Mercury, and he goes retrograde. So retrograde begins, retrograde ends on the 21st of April at 15 degrees of Taurus. And this is kind of an important thing because the degree area that planet is retrograding over, this part of your chart, this real estate, gets three like trips. That whatever planet this is applicable to any retrograde planet is going to have three trips over that space on your chart. So learning to understand where is that in my chart, and do I have anything that's really obvious there that's going to be triggered or activated. Okay, so it goes retrograde at 15 degrees of Taurus, and then on May 15th goes direct at 5 degrees. So that means the trip between 5 degrees to 15 degrees, that's like, and I'm going to use the analogy I've used before, that's like you leave your house at 5 degrees and you head out to the shop, and you're halfway to the shop, you get to 15 degrees and you think, I've forgotten my handbag, and you turn around and travel back. That's from 15 back to 5. That's the retrograde. So getting up to the point where you forgot your handbag or your car keys, that was the shadow. That first part of the trip, you've headed there. At the time, you didn't realize that you were going to reach a point in which you would forget, recognize you've forgotten something, and head back to the front door, get what you needed, and then that's when you stations direct again and you travel back to 15 degrees. And it's only when you go past the point that you forgot something and had to head backwards that you're out of the whole conversation. So there's a pre-shadow and there's a post-shadow, and most strongly people speak about the retrograde itself, but it's become very common for people to discuss the shadow as well. And we're in the shadow now. So what's interesting about that is that if you're aware that you've gone into the shadow and you look at the narrative that shows up for you around the period of 5 degrees to get to 15 degrees, you're going to start to recognize when you're in retrograde, oh, that theme's been actually with me for a little while. That dialogue, that inner narrative's been playing, on repeat. And now I'm coming back, I'm getting really uncomfortable with it. That's the retrograde, like, oh, I don't want to think this way anymore. I don't want to behave this way anymore, because Mercury is our thinking self. Mercury is the planet that controls our mind, the way we problem solve. It's about short trips, about communication and expression, sibling rivalry, partnerships, connection with friends, all these sorts of things. So if you understand that's where Mercury's sort of wheelhouse is, and then you add Taurus to the mix and say, well, Taurus is grounded. Mercury is not very grounded. Taurus is slow and steady, wins the race. Taurus is hard to move. Mercury is quick to move. He changes direction really easily. He doesn't really believe in slow and steady. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. So they're not supernaturally congruent with one another. So when Mercury gets into Taurus on any given cycle, there's this like sort of uncomfortable slowing down of our thinking that isn't comfortable for Mercury, but is also at the same time sometimes really necessary to ground his thoughts, to ground his processing. And this is not always easy to do. This is also where I want you to come back to looking in your own natal chart. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. Okay, so this is where you can see the retrograde period and the retrograde degrees. But now I'm going to open into the chart that is the stationing retrograde, chart on the, I just want to make sure I've got the right one, 21st, yes. On the 21st. So remember, I've drawn this for where I live. So the fact that Gemini is sitting on the ascendant is not necessarily going to be true for you where you live. So don't worry about where exactly on the sort of wheel or clock face this is, rather the degrees and the signs. Then you can take it into your chart. And you can see that when Mercury stations direct, this is Mercury over here. Let's blow him up. That's Mercury. He is conjunct the moon. Can you see how the moon is at 15 degrees and Mercury is at 15 degrees simultaneously? And they're only 2 degrees off Uranus. So it's actually a Mercury moon Uranus conjunction. And Uranus in some ways is like a higher expression of Mercury. They both have this kind of like electric, jolty, quick change energy to them. But Mercury in a more maybe a personal way for us, whereas Uranus in a more kind of collective global way. Okay, so that is telling us that the retrograde is going to have emotions and our needs, moon, infused into this process, and there's going to be some quick change, maybe out in the world, not just in our personal environment, but also in our personal environment. Something might happen that suddenly you were absolutely one way. This is how you thought about things. This is what you've, the story that you've told over and over and over again, and something happens and you're just like, that is actually not true for me anymore. I can't believe that I thought that all these years. I don't think it at all like that. It could happen like that, but it's going to bring up a lot of emotion, because if you've been one way, if you are kind of like self-identified in a certain way, then losing that is like a deep loss, a deep grief. And actually today, as I'm recording this, I just did the weekly reading where the anchor card of the reading was the Three of Swords. And I'm having this kind of Three of Swords moment here. So the traditional Three of Swords in the tarot is a heart with 3 swords stabbed into it. And it's a card that is very much about our mind, Mercury. It's an air card, or swords is our thinking. But our heart is broken, our heart is wounded, and that is our emotional self. So we could say moon. And it's like at that point, how do I discern if I'm thinking this, or if I'm emotionally feeling this, or if I'm physically feeling this, Taurus? So we've got this real mix mash of, I can't tell where my feelings begin and my thoughts end, and my thoughts begin and my feelings end, and what I've known to be true suddenly doesn't feel true for me anymore. And if that isn't true, then who am I? Because this is what I've known my whole life. So it looks to me like it could be really uncomfortable. And because it's in Taurus, and Taurus is like stubborn, fixed earth energy, that, when it's those ingrained things, Taurus doesn't like a change. It's scary. We've all been experiencing with Uranus doing ultimately it will be 7 years in Taurus. So for a while now, we've been experiencing that kind of theme anyway, because Uranus has been throwing these little lightning bolts and creating these earth tremors in how we see ourselves as a collective, how we see ourselves individually in our own stories, and it's been disruptive. And this retrograde feels like it's really digging into that conversation. So if you have anything between 5 and 15 Taurus, that's going to be really, really, really strong for you. But if you have anything square to that area, or opposite that area, it's going to be strong. So in the fixed signs, okay, the fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. If you have anything between 5 and 15 of those, and you could even take it to like 2 and 18 of those signs. Okay, so now I just want to show you how you personalize. So I'm going to actually use some examples from my chart here just to show you how it works. Okay, so I can already tell that I am going to feel this acutely, because it's going to trigger specific things in my chart quite strongly. Okay, for example, I'm going to be in exact Uranus opposition, which means 17 degrees of Taurus is exactly opposite 17 degrees of Scorpio, where my natal Uranus is. And a Uranus opposition is a big deal anyway. It's kind of a point we can almost look at as the midlife crisis point. It's breakdown to breakthrough. So I've actually been traversing this backwards and forwards because of retrogrades for a while already. And this is the last visit that Uranus is going to do this opposition at the exact degree point. And that's happening at the same time that I have to have experience in the same space a Mercury retrograde. And Mercury is my is one of a major ruling planet in my chart because it rules my sun sign in Gemini. I know this is a little complicated, but I'm just throwing this little story in. If you don't understand what I'm saying, just don't worry, meet yourself where you are. But if you've been starting to study your astrology and you hear these things, it's going to start to make sense. And you just hear it, you let it infuse. It's like osmosis. Over time, you go, wow, I mean, this isn't Greek anymore. I'm starting to understand. If you're not at that point, don't even worry. Pay attention more when I'm speaking in the big picture. But this is just for people to have a little bit of a snippet of how you bring something in the heavens right now into your own chart, okay? So I know this Mercury retrograde is going to be triggering because of that, but I can also see that Venus at 11 degrees of Gemini is only going to be a couple of degrees off my natal Venus at 8 degrees. So my Venus is very active as well, and Venus rules Taurus. She's ruling this Mercury retrograde, she's ruling this moon, she's ruling this Uranus. So I have a very strong Mercury-Venus dynamic happening, a very strong Uranus dynamic happening. I can see, and that, I mean, in fact, my natal Mercury is at 16 degrees of Cancer over here, just off where Mars is. So Mars is coming to activate my natal Mercury at the same time. So there are so many different points in this particular Uranus Mercury stationing retrograde chart that is very specifically triggering stuff in my chart. So I can panic, or I can go, okay, well, what are those component parts? What is it that I need to work on? I need to work on my understanding and my thinking and my mindset. I need to look at old conditioned belief systems that maybe don't actually fit me anymore. And what is my core values, Venus? What are my core values and how do I want to get that moving forward? So now we can jump into the chart that is when Mercury stations direct. So when he's just finished, he still has the shadow, right? But he's just finished his retrograde and he's going to station direct. Now, what's interesting is he's stationed retrograde right there with the moon, like fingers, hands holding with the moon and with Uranus. And he ends here at 5 degrees, and while he's here, the moon isn't, who was holding his hand at the beginning, is here with Neptune, conjunct Neptune. And so it's almost like our needs, on culmination of this, we have this ability to really feel and embody an ideal, a dream, a new world, because there's a real imaginal feel to Neptune. And the moon is about embodying these ideas. So she can be much more idealistic, intuitive. And because of all that we've experienced through the retrograde process, we might be ready for a new way of thinking, ready for a new dream. Uranus and Mercury are quite far from each other now. Mercury is very close to the North Node. So as we come back to this end of this story, we have an opportunity to go, okay, so how now? Brown cow, as we land in Taurus here. Sorry, Mercury moment. How now do we take our newfound understanding of what we don't actually understand anymore and have to reform and refound and rebuild the foundations of things for our greatest good, individually and collectively, because the North Node is our Dharma, it's our greatest potential. So what do we do to cultivate that now? So that's really important. Another thing I noticed in this chart is that Jupiter is at 29 degrees of Aries, which is exactly where, at this point it would have happened, because this is the 15th of May, exactly where the second Aries new moon was at 29 degrees, and it was an eclipse. So we don't usually have two new moons in the same sign. So it's already a big deal that we have, it's kind of a once in a blue moon kind of thing, that we have a new moon in the same sign. That's a big deal. And the fact that it's at the very last degree of a sign, that's a big deal. And the fact that it was eclipse, that's a big deal. And Jupiter himself is a big deal. He's a big guy and he makes things bigger. And he's coming back to that exact point that new moon happened, that complete new beginning. And he's blasting it open again at a point where we finish that retrograde and Moon and Neptune are conjunct, saying, let's dream a new dream. Let's embody a new way of being, a new life, a new thinking pattern. Let's do it practically, like Taurus says. Let's bring it back to earth. Let's bring it to ground. Let's plant our way into a new future. Let's reforest, ostensibly. So I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. Again, I can bring that into the present by saying the time that we go direct, I can see that the sun is exactly on my Mars. So again, there's an aspect of how I do things. I'm now personalizing it. I'm going to be really emboldened at the end of this uncomfortable process. How do I shine my light and move forward in a different way, in a new way? How do I actually take action with that? So there's a lot, you can hear me jumping in and out of, first of all, what's happening on the one chart to the other chart, the space between, what is there in your chart, and just a little understanding of how I've shown you. I will then take the information I'm seeing and I will put it near my chart and I'll say, okay, so what is that touching? And I mean, we can go much deeper, but that's not what this is about. It's just for you to see how you can start to bring it more personal, because astrology is never going to have nothing to tell you. Never. There's always going to be more for you to actually read and uncover than you have the time, the space, the awareness, the knowledge to uncover. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how long you've been studying this language. It's always going to have more to tell you. And different astrologers will have different viewpoints. So if you find people you like listening to, then listen to them and take from them what works for you, and listen to different viewpoints, because different people are going to see the story slightly differently. Nobody is wrong in their interpretation. It's just we experience and interpret through the lens of the experience that we've had, the life that we've lived. So yes, I hope that has been helpful, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Remember that I am available to work with you personally, to help you to learn, and I'm teaching through my Women's Red Tent gathering at New Moon how to look at the lens of astrology through one master teacher at a time. So taking the Mars, applying that to your chart, starting to understand and integrate in a slow, cumulative way. So if you're interested in that, please check out the link in my bio. If you're interested in having your natal chart done, or having a tarot reading, or having a healing session, or a combo session, I work online that can help balance your energies, check in with your astrology, and do a card reading. I'm open for those things too. So please check out the links, and thank you very much for watching. Have a beautiful, beautiful retrograde. Good luck. Use it. Don't panic.